Hello everyone, I am Mariel Batalya and our group will discuss about the communication barriers. First, let us define what is communication barrier. Communication barrier, also called as noise, are internal or external factors that hinders or distract the transmission of the message, leading to misunderstanding, confusion, or misinterpretation. Now, what are those internal factors and external factors? In internal factors, we have emotional, psychological, gender, cultural, organizational, and attitudinal. While external factors are technological, environmental, semantic, and syntactical. Now, let us give definitions on those types of communication barriers. First, we have emotional barrier that will discuss by Mr. Pahudpod.
So, what is an emotional barrier? Judging from the name, I'm sure everyone can have a rough idea what it is. This type of internal factor rises from feelings like fear, anxiety, anger, or sadness that block effective communication. Causes are, of course, as I've mentioned earlier, are all strong emotions each and every one of us feel. These are anger, stress, anxiety, and many more. Even lack of emotional intelligence is a key cause when it comes to this. Emotional barriers affect all kinds of relationships, such as partners, family, and even friends. They can be all affected, which makes us need to be punctual and knowledgeable about emotional barriers. I can't speak about for everyone, but from my experience, I lost many friends due to miscommunication. I was afraid of losing them, so I never spoke up and just pushed them away. This is a key effect of emotional barriers, as you can see here, which is damaged relationships. Strong emotions like anger prevented me from communicating well, and when I finally did, they were rightfully upset, leading to conflicts and disagreements. We've all heard that communication is key, but emotional barriers can make it very difficult to express ourselves, ultimately staying in our relationships. So, for our next barrier will be discussed by Dax Studio.
Psychological barrier. These are mental blocks caused by stress, anxiety, or low self-esteem that affects how we communicate. So, psychological barrier is a mental state of a person that disrupt communication. Some of the factors are anxiety, phobia, and stress that can lead of ineffective communication. One of the example of this is when you need to perform a speech to a front of people on a stage and you feel uncomfortable to speak because you don't want to be ashamed of your word. So some causes of this is stress, anxiety, or emotional distress, low self-esteem, or lack of confidence and fear of judgment or failure. And lastly, the effects of the psychological barrier are hesitation to communicate or share ideas, poor decisions making, and reduced engagement and participation. So we proceed to our next presentation by represented by Dustin Sebastian.
So, what is gender barrier? In simple terms, a gender barrier refers to the challenges that arise when communication is influenced by societal norms and stereotypes tied to gender. These barriers can manifest in various ways. For example, individuals may face misunderstanding or misinterpretation because of expectations. For example, when men and women communicate, consider how women might be perceived as less authoritative in certain settings, or how men can be can be expected to communicate more assertively. These assumptions create unequal power dynamics where certain voices may not be heard or valued equally. Ultimately, these gender based barriers hinder effective communication, leading to frustration, miscommunication, and reinforcement of harmful stereotypes. Addressing these barriers is essential for respect and productive conversations, but both personally and professionally. We can now proceed to the next topic. Thank you.
Next is cultural barrier. This occurs when differences in cultural norms, values, or traditions leads to misunderstandings. Cultural barrier describes a cultural barrier to communication or cross-cultural misunderstandings. This happen when people from a different cultural background interprets the way they communicate, gestures, and behaviors. For instance, a gesture that's polite in one culture might be offensive in another. It is like dancing to different rhythms. You're both moving but not in sync. Causes of it is differences in language or communication styles. Example of that is a tourist in Japan asks for direction in English, but the local only speaks Japanese, which can lead to confusion and make it difficult to find the destination. Next is varied cultural norms, values, or traditions. Example of that is in some cultures, arriving late is normal, while in others, being on time is important. Other of that is in some cultures, taking off shoes before entering a home expected, while in others, it is not. Next is stereotypes or biases. Example of that is the manager thinks that Asians are naturally good at math, so the manager assign a task to them without knowing their interests and skills. This can lead to some offend in some Asian because not all Asians are naturally good at maths. Then the effects of cultural barrier is misinterpretation or misunderstanding. Different cultural meanings can cause confusions or disorientations. Next is offense or discomfort in interactions. Basically, stereotypes or insensitivity can make others feel disrespected or offended because of that kind of stereotypes. Next is hindered teamwork and cooperation. Cultural differences can create a poor communication or trust issues. Next. Next one is organizational barrier. This happen when structures, policies, or hierarchies within an organization hinder communication. Basically, organizational barriers are obstacles within a company that make work harder and less efficient. The causes of it is rigid hierarchy structure. Too many management levels slow decision making and communication. Next is poor communication channels or policies. Ineffective ways of sharing information can lead to misunderstandings. Um, Example of that is rumors. Rumors is not a right way to deliver or share that kind of information because it's not good. So it can damage the reputation of company if it is spread. Next is lack of resources or support. Limited staff, budget, or manpower, or even tools make tasks harder to complete. Effects of it is slow decision-making processes, hierarchies, and poor communication cause delay. Next is low employee moral and engagement. Lack of support can lead to demotivation, like workers can feel discouraged because they lack of support. The company lacks support its workers. And last is inefficient workflow and reduced productivity. Poor coordination and resources shortage, slow work. It can cause bottleneck in the workflow in the company. The next barrier to be discussed by Mr. Galias.
So, hello everyone. I will now be discussing the last of the internal factors of the barriers of communication, which is the attitudinal barrier. So, let's start defining attitudinal barrier. Attitudinal barrier, as the name suggests, stems from the negative attitudes or bad attitudes, or it could also arise from prejudices or egos clashing with each other. Thus, with these obstacles, they can block open communication and rather making it difficult for people to connect or collaborate effectively with each other. Uh, let's start with the causes. One major cause is a negative mindset or preconceived notions about others. For example, if someone already has a biased opinion, they might dismiss ideas of others without listening. Because why would they listen when they already have their own ideals set in stone? So they would just rather ignore. Right? Another cause is a lack of empathy or understanding. When people don't try to see things from another's perspective, it creates a disconnection. And last will be the resistance to change or new ideas. Some people are rather uncomfortable with change and would just shut down anything that challenges their way of thinking, which correlates with the biased opinion one because again, why would they challenge themselves or make themselves challenge harder something when they have their own ideas of easier things, right? So, what are the effects? Poor communication and collaboration. So, when people aren't open to listening or sharing, it will lead to misunderstandings and inefficiency. Uh, it can also cause conflicts or strained relationships. Negative attitudes and defensiveness on one's opinion often escalates to tensions within the group, thus making it harder to work together. And over time, this reduces productivity and morale. When communication breaks down, well, people would feel demotivated and the overall output would suffer. And that ends the external factors of the barriers of communication. And now we will move on to the internal factors. So basically, internal factors are the barriers of communication that you can control or factors that come outside rather than inside yourself, like psychological, attitudinal, and so on. So let's start off our internal factors on technological barrier. Technological barriers occurs when technology fails or isn't used effectively. Like for example, a Zoom call. Of course, when someone has a terrible audio or uh, a weak Wi-Fi, it can disrupt communication. It's like trying to have a conversation through a broken phone, which can be frustrating and could be very inefficient. What are the common causes of technological barrier? One major cause is an outdated or an incompatible technology. If tools or systems aren't up to date, they can create many obstacles, a lot of obstacles, which of course can be a hindrance to many of us. So, like for example, your device wants to keep up but can't because of it being old, broken, or just the system not really being compatible to the software's system requirements, and so on. Another cause is a lack of technical skills or knowledge. I mean, if people don't know how to use their own technology properly, of course, it will lead to inefficiency. Poor internet connectivity or malfunctioning equipment can also be a big issue. For instance, a weak Wi-Fi signal or a faulty microphone can disrupt communication entirely, just like the Zoom call. Like, let's say when your professor is discussing something and he has a weak Wi-Fi signal that day, of course, there's a chance that they would disconnect. And if they disconnected, it would delay the process or the discussion process, which can be a hindrance to some students. Now, what are the effects of these barriers or the technological barrier? Na delayed or disrupted communication. So when technology fails, messages don't get through on time and would cause confusion. Delayed or disrupted communication. When technology fails, rather, sorry, it also leads to inefficiency in task completion. Teams can't collaborate effectively if their own tools aren't working properly. Of course, if your own tools that you need to do some process aren't working properly or your devices, it would lead to many mishaps on your work, which can be very frustrating. And over time, this causes frustration and decreased motivation. Constantly dealing with technical issues left and right can be very draining and demoralizing. And that's all for the technological barrier. And now I would like to pass the mic to Dallas Morales.
So, environmental barriers are physical or external factors that hinder communication or interaction. So, this is these are causes like physical distractions and natural distractions. So, for example, you're having a class and there's construction work going on outside, and you can have a good and engaging class when there's too much noise going on inside and outside the class. Or distance, distance and location. Distance becomes an issue when you're too far from each other, from your friends or your partner. Example, from seating arrangements or general vicinity or distance in meetings. Distance greatly affects the sound from each other for everyone. This is exactly why chats or the internet was made for, to solve this issue. And lighting. Lighting, for example, is when you're with a group, you need proper lighting in order to distinguish the person you are talking to. Therefore, it's better to talk to well lit places like uh when there's light on or in places where it's sunny. Natural distraction. Examples of these are weather conditions. Weather conditions could be in situations like when you're eating or having coffee outside and suddenly there's changes in weather conditions like it rained. All of these examples or causes could have varying common effects like misunderstanding, lack of concentration, and difficulty to hear each other. So sometimes it's better to just move to a better setting or switch to better modes of communication like the internet. Therefore, it is important that certain adjustments are to be made in order to solve or eliminate environmental barriers like these in the communication barrier.
So we we will I will discuss another two types or the last two types of communication barrier. So first is the semantic barrier, also known as a language barrier. This happens when the messenger used a language that is different to the language of the receiver, or when the speaker used a jargons or slang words that might misinterpret by the listener. Also, incorrect translation of the word or phrase will affect the effectiveness of the communication. And lastly, the use of ambiguity. So, what is ambiguity? These are words or phrase that has a multiple meaning. Example, the man pushing the cart was tall. So, it is unclear if the man was tall or the cart was. The next, um, wait, no, oh my god. The next barrier is the syntactical barrier. So, syntactical barriers occurs when the phrase or the structure of the message is grammatically incorrect, or the use of complex words or sentence that might reduce the comprehension of the receiver. Also, unclear pronunciation will confuse the listener. So, what are the difference of these two semantic barrier or of these two communication barrier? So, semantic barrier focused on the words or the phrase or the language rather that was used, while syntactical barrier focus on the structure and the grammar of the message. So that's all for communication barriers. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.